Hello. We're diving into Chapter 2 of Jane Eyre Summary and Analysis. Oh boy, Chapter 2 of Jane Eyre is where things really start to get intense. Buckle up, because this chapter dives deep into Jane's first real act of rebellion, and the emotional fallout is as turbulent as it gets. Here's the lowdown, with all the passion and drama you'd expect from Charlotte Bronte. Main idea: this chapter is all about Jane's first big act of resistance against the cruel, oppressive household she lives in. After being unjustly blamed for an altercation with her bullying cousin John, Jane is dragged to the infamous Red Room, an eerie, almost haunted place, and locked in as punishment. The chapter explores Jane's inner turmoil, the injustice she faces, and her rising sense of defiance against the people who have mistreated her. Supporting points and evidence: Jane isn't just rebellious for the sake of it. The book shows how her frustration is rooted in the unfairness of her situation. Her cousin John strikes her, yet she's the one punished. This isn't just a one-time occurrence either. It's a pattern of neglect and cruelty. Bessie and Miss Abbot, the servants, remind Jane of her status, less than a servant, a dependent, and it grates on her soul. We feel her simmering rage and helplessness as she's dragged to the Red Room. Key events, plot points: Jane strikes back at her cousin John, which leads to her being forcefully confined in the Red Room. In the room, Jane is overwhelmed with fear and emotion. The room itself is symbolic. This is where Mr. Reed, Jane's deceased uncle, died. It's a tomb of sorts, dark, cold, and deeply unsettling. Jane's reflections are a pivotal moment. As she sits alone, she contemplates her suffering, the unfairness of her treatment compared to the Reed children, and her general alienation from the family. It's a lot for a young girl to process. The chapter ends with Jane's fear spiraling. She imagines supernatural forces at work, likely fueled by the Red Room's ghostly atmosphere and her heightened emotions. She eventually collapses, unconscious from the trauma. Characters: Jane Eyre. This is Jane's chapter through and through. We see her strength and independence peeking through, even as a child. Her thoughts are intense, precocious, and filled with justified anger. This is a girl who knows she's being treated unfairly, and she's not going to take it lying down. Though she's a servant, Bessie has a bit of compassion for Jane, but even she buys into the idea that Jane should be grateful for any scraps of kindness. Her voice is the more reasonable one compared to Miss Abbot. Miss Abbot is harsher, more judgmental, and full of warnings about divine punishment for Jane's perceived wickedness. Mrs. Reed, the real villain here. Mrs. Reed, Jane's aunt, treats her with coldness and disdain. Her harsh treatment of Jane highlights the rigid social class distinctions of the time and sets up a lifelong conflict between the two. Mood and atmosphere. Bronte masterfully creates an atmosphere that is both oppressive and eerie. The Red Room is a perfect metaphor for Jane's isolation and fear. It's cold, dark, and associated with death. Mr. Reed's spirit almost feels like it's looming over the room. The room itself is described in rich, vivid detail: red damask curtains, a massive bed, and an aura of solemnity. You can feel the chill in the air as Jane contemplates her situation. The room, like Jane's life, is suffocating, and the tension builds as she becomes more desperate and terrified. Sentiment and themes. The overwhelming sentiment here is isolation. Jane feels utterly alone, emotionally and physically. Even as a child, she understands she's an outsider in the Reed household, and her reflection on her powerlessness is heartbreaking. The theme of social class is stark, too. Jane's status as a dependent is constantly thrown in her face, and it feels like a shackle she can't break free from. Another huge theme is justice versus injustice. Jane's sense of right and wrong is sharp, and it's clear that the Reed family's treatment of her is wildly unfair. Her internal cry of "unjust, unjust" is a powerful moment, showing that even though she's young, she's acutely aware of the wrongs being done to her. Concluding remarks. The chapter ends with Jane collapsing in fear, underscoring just how much trauma this little girl is carrying. It's a dramatic conclusion to a chapter that digs deep into her psyche, revealing her vulnerability, anger, and loneliness. What stood out to me? What really stuck with me from this chapter was how Bronte captures the complexity of Jane's emotions. She's not just sad or scared, she's angry. Her spirit of rebellion is already simmering beneath the surface. And even in this terrible moment, You can sense that Jane isn't someone who's going to stay down for long. The way Bronte combines Gothic atmosphere with intense emotional depth is just perfect. What's Bronte trying to convey here? Jane's experience is a microcosm of how society tries to crush those who don't fit its mold. Jane doesn't fit in, and that's precisely why she's so compelling as a heroine. We're rooting for her to break free of this stifling life, and this chapter is the first taste of that journey. Join the conversation. Share your thoughts on how Jane's experiences resonate with you in the comments below. And don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more juicy book discussions, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all things literary. Let's get lost in the world of Jane Eyre together.